Kira and I met by chance. In winter, just before the new year, we visited some mutual friends, then went to the tram stop together. I thought then that it would be great if we were on the way, but it turned out that she even lived nearby at her aunt's. Without reaching me one stop, I saw her off, as it should be. Then we didn't see each other for about a month. Then we met, exchanged phones. No one had mobile phones at that time, and then it went. She was about 19 years old at the time, just a girl still. She lived in our city with her aunt as a dependent, so at the first opportunity one immediately took her to my place. We didn't have a lot of free space either, a small 2-room apartment, except that it wasn't adjacent. My parents were in the hall, and we also had a brother in addition. We slept together on a creaky single bed. The windows faced south, and the sun burned mercilessly during the day. Kira immediately informed me that I would earn money in our family and I would also provide for her and the child. I was a little taken aback. I hoped at least for equality, having got used to seeing, like many of my friends, how money is usually brought to modern families by mothers. Half a year before my meeting with Kira, I separated from my first wife and lived with my parents. Kira, despite her youth, also managed to be married. Moreover, which, thank God, I found out much later. At the time of our meeting, she was still officially married. Her relationship with her husband broke down, and he gave her a vacation. Her husband was very ambitious in his youth. Karina, according to her, married him for the future, and then, as it happens, he gave up, lowered the bar. His claims. Kira responded by finding a lover, whom she also said goodbye to after we met. At that time, I was not at all a rich, if not a poor, sick young man receiving another higher education. I didn't eat well. I was skinny. In general, I digested the experience of my first marriage. After our first intimacy, when we were interrupted by my mother, who came from the market at the wrong time, Kira sat up in bed and told me about her husband and her lover. I almost burst into tears at her honesty. Then she said that I had to become a successful man, otherwise she wouldn't vouch for herself in the future. She said that probably not now, but still sometime after 30 she would have lovers. I listened in silence and shook my head. Then I thought for a while I was making tea, and made her an official offer. Both my silence and my proposal were primarily explained by the fact that Kira was wonderfully good in bed. She lived by sex. For me, with my distant, but not at all stalled with generations of mountain roots, it was more than fundamental. My first wife was smart, but cold. And Kira was both hot and temperamental, and smart, and most importantly, a very beautiful, thin, elegant Oriental girl, spectacular and bright. We got married in the fall. The wedding was modest, but beautiful. The weather was nice and warm, despite the end of September. By that time, Kira was already pregnant. We went to the German forts and walked there with the guests for half a day, along the moat filled with water, brick bastions, ponds on pedestals. Under the shade of a yellow-green grove, the sun shone soft and warm, reflecting brightly in the water. The white wedding against the background of autumn colors is clearly imprinted in my memory. On our wedding night, we barely got to bed, performed the obligatory ceremony, and then Kira took the camera she had given us and forced herself to take pictures, naked, in stockings and under a veil. We drank champagne, laughed and fooled around. The photos turned out to be very piquant. The girl who gave them to me from print was smiling mysteriously. Kira and I lived soul to soul, despite pregnancy, studies and my hard work. We also endured childbirth courageously, although we were terribly tired. I worked like hell, but I still didn't have enough money. On the basis of fatigue and lack of money, alienation from each other appeared. At first, I just didn't want to talk to each other, and later I didn't even want to be around. Sex life on a single cramped bed in a room with my brother began to seem not bright, but bland. Something had to be done. One day in the spring of 2005, walking in the park with a stroller, we looked at each other with the realization that feelings, like a bad fuse, were about to fade away. We didn't want to do this, but at first glance, there was nothing we could do. We started talking about the need to change something radically. Kira suggested that I return to Europe, settle in, and then take them with me. I did not want to leave my family then. Having learned from the experience of my first marriage and understanding the consequences of such a long separation, I offered my own version. She thought about it and agreed to try it someday. That's how we began to live in a new way. One day we decided to live in a different way. In a new way. I've already talked about it. It is very difficult to realize that you are internally free. I was born in the Soviet Union. My parents did not gravitate towards dissent. On the contrary, they belonged to that generation of lucky ones, whose youth fell in the 70s, and to whom the Union gave everything. But they were no longer afraid of the Union itself. They did not know what war, hunger, cold, unemployment, humiliation of personality, hopelessness were. Actually, I, whose childhood fell on the liberal 80s, eventually had to join the ranks of carefree lucky people, but it didn't work out. First, the 90s rode on a gray mare, and with them life on the verge of poverty, because parents never managed to adapt to the new time, especially dad. Then the war in Chechnya and the daily fear that he would be sent there, which entered the subcortex. Then default. Oh, I remember him very well. Before him, my mother was given a small amount of money at school every week. She went with her to the market and brought meat, doctor's sausage, some sweets to my brother and me. Then that didn't happen either. And yet, I didn't know how to think for myself at all then. The Pioneer was cancelled a month before I was supposed to join it. I stubbornly kept a tie with a tag in the closet. It seems 15 kopecks. I was the only one who went through elementary school in a Soviet blue uniform. I studied in the second shift, and therefore, when I ran for bread in the afternoon, I went to the park of the Garrison House of Officers, an ancient German manor house, where a bronze Lenin stuck out on a concrete pedestal under the shade of lime trees. I stood in front of him, and the glare played on his polished bald crown, and the earth smelled of sweetness and last year's leaves.
Soon, however, the craftsman took Lenin to the reception of color medals. And I went to practice martial arts. It was very fashionable then. But I was a timid boy, and for the first time I got serious in training. I immediately disliked this case. Dad said that if I quit everything, I'd grow up characterless. I was much more afraid of this, and studied for another 5 years. I went through unimaginable thorns to believe in God. I thought, I don't believe in anything at all. Everyone said faith is a feat. Where do you go? And I couldn't even pray. I learned the Our Father with difficulty. I prayed like my great-grandmother, whom I once overheard, "Dear God, forgive me, a sinner." It was only after many years that I realized that I had always believed with the sincerity of a child. But former Soviet citizens only got in the way after reading smart books. What am I doing all this for? Yes, to the fact that I always did what I needed to do, and not what I wanted to do. What did I want? At a tender age, I watched, secretly from my parents, of course, the second part of The Wild Orchid. The movie made an impression on me, which I am still under. You remember, a young man, a girl, romantic love. Only one problem: a romantic heroine in a capitalist society earns extra money in an expensive brothel, and she can't say that she doesn't like it. That's the most important thing. I thought then, all those women, teachers, acquaintances, well-mannered, Romantic. The only love to the grave in my head. All Decemberist wives. But how do they live? Their husbands drink, walk recklessly. Sometimes you can't tell these husbands from a pig. But wow, they weren't like that once. They have the whole soul and the only love.